Police in Indonesia say last week's bombings in Jakarta that left 9 people dead and many others injured are identical to those in Bali in 2005. Suicide bombers blew themselves up in the Ritz-Carlton and Marriott hotels, and Asia's most wanted terrorist is the suspected mastermind. Well, let's get more on this from former Naval Intelligence Officer, investigative journalist and RT contributor, Wayne Madsen. Now, Wayne, in your report, you connect the bombings with riots around an Indonesian journalist's home. Tell us, well, what's the basis of that?
Well, this particular journalist, who's now having to flee Indonesia with his family, reported in 2002 that there were fingerprints of the CIA, U.S. Special Forces, and Israeli intelligence on the Bali bombings. He cited the fact that a Dash 7 plane flew into Denpasar Airport in Bali shortly before the bombings there and flew out, this particular plane flew out with the bodies of 4 white men in uniform and went to Singapore, and from there to destination unknown. Now that aircraft was registered in Israel. There was also the 2003 bombing at the Marriott Hotel, which was also linked by this particular journalist to U.S. intelligence. At the time, the person who was supposedly the head of Jemaah-Islamiyah, the so-called Al-Qaeda branch in Southeast Asia, stated that he thought that that particular bombing of the Marriott had the CIA fingerprints written all over it. I would also add that shortly before that bombing, a CIA team that was there to conduct the arrest of Jemaah-Islamiyah No. 2, Hambali in Thailand, quickly departed the Marriott shortly before the bombing. So here we have another case, but in this case we have the President of Indonesia himself, President Yudhoyono, saying that this bombing, last bombing, was linked to the vice presidential candidate who was running against him. This bombing was during the counting of the votes for president, and he suggested that this individual was linked to the bombing, and that individual, General Subianto, was trained by U.S. Special Forces, was the former head of the Indonesian Red Beret, and of course is a very good friend of Admiral Dennis Blair, Obama's Director of National Intelligence.
And also, Wayne, with these latest bombings, you actually say that Indonesian authorities knew an attack was possible. If that was the case, why then was no action taken?
Well, that's a question being raised in Indonesia today. The Indonesian National Police apparently had a warning 2 months prior to this bombing that this would take place. No action was taken, so the questions are being asked, how much did they know, when did they know it, and why were not other authorities tipped off about these this intelligence? So there's a lot of questions about who was behind this last bombing.
All right, well, yes, this last bombing, and bearing in mind what has been said about the previous bombings, there is definitely a suggestion that U.S. representatives were in some way involved. Now, do you really believe that U.S. Secret Services would be involved this time? And why would the U.S. be interested in meddling in affairs in Indonesia?
Well, President Yudhoyono said that intelligence received by him prior to this bombing indicated that a shadowy group was using his photograph for target practice. He's linked, of course, this last bombing and this particular group to his political rival, General Subianto, and so therefore we have the President of Indonesia suggesting that what they had planned for Indonesia was exactly what happened in Iran. They were going to not respect the vote. They were going to suggest that President Yudhoyono did not win that election fairly, and he said they wanted to turn Indonesia into another Iran. And of course, we know now that U.S. Intelligence was very active with the opposition in Iran with this so-called Green Revolution.
Well, extraordinary revelations there. Interesting to hear what you have to say. Thanks very much indeed, RT contributor and investigative journalist Wayne Madsen, joining us live from the States. Thank you.